Tanks changed warfare forever, but not every idea worked. Some machines were death traps, some were overcomplicated nightmares, some failed so hard they became legends for all the wrong reasons. This is every worst tank design from World War I to the modern era and why they failed. Starting off with World War I disasters. Tsar tank. This Russian monstrosity looked like a giant tricycle with two massive front wheels and a tiny rear wheel. The idea was simple: roll over trenches. The execution was catastrophic. The front wheels were 27 feet tall, but the rear wheel was pathetically small. It got stuck in soft ground during the first field test and never moved again. Designers forgot that mud exists. The project was abandoned, and the wreck sat rusting in a field until it was scrapped for metal during World War II. Music. A monument to optimism over physics. Flying Elephant. Britain's Mark II tank prototype was nicknamed the Flying Elephant, which tells you everything. It was massive, slow, and weighed 37 tons. The goal was to carry enough armor to survive anything. The problem was, it couldn't survive its own weight. Engines overheated constantly, the suspension collapsed under the load, crew compartments were sweltering death boxes. It was designed to cross wide trenches, but it couldn't even cross a field without breaking down. Only a handful were built. By the time it was ready, the war was over. It works as a museum piece. That's about it. Moving on to interwar oddities. Vickers Independent. This British tank from the 1920s tried to do everything at once. It had 5 turrets, one main turret with a 3-pounder gun, and 4 smaller turrets with machine guns scattered around the hull. The idea was 360-degree coverage. The reality was chaos. Crew communication was a nightmare. Targeting multiple enemies simultaneously was impossible. The thing was slow, tall, and an easy target. Only one prototype was built. It influenced Soviet multi-turret designs, which also failed spectacularly. Dangerous in theory, useless in practice. T-35 Soviet heavy tank. The Soviets looked at the Vickers Independent and said, "Let's make it worse." The T-35 had 5 turrets, weighed 50 tons, and required a crew of 11. It was designed to intimidate. It succeeded at that during parades. In combat, it was a disaster. Mechanical breakdowns were constant. The transmission couldn't handle the weight. Visibility was abysmal. Turrets couldn't coordinate fire. Most T-35s broke down before reaching the battlefield during the German invasion in 1941. The few that made it were destroyed by German anti-tank guns without firing a shot. It looked impressive. It fought like a parade float. Continuing with World War II failures, Bob Semple tank. New Zealand's only tank design was built from a Caterpillar tractor and corrugated iron. The Bob Semple was a desperate improvisation in 1940 when invasion seemed imminent. It had no armor to speak of. The turrets were just boxes welded on top. The crew of 8 sat in a cramped, unventilated hull that turned into an oven. It couldn't stop rifle bullets. It had no suspension, so driving it was agony. Visibility was terrible. It never saw combat. Good thing, because it would have been obliterated instantly, a symbol of determination. Also, a symbol of why tractors shouldn't be tanks. Caro Veloce CV-33. Italy's tankette was one of the worst fighting vehicles of the war. It was tiny, cramped, and armed with a single machine gun. 2 crew members sat side by side in a hull barely big enough for one. Armor was thin enough that rifle fire could penetrate it. It had no turret, so the gun couldn't traverse. Crews had to turn the entire vehicle to aim. In North Africa, British troops called them mobile coffins. They were easily destroyed by anti-tank rifles, let alone actual tanks. Italy built thousands of them. Most were abandoned or destroyed. It was cheap to build. That's the only thing it had going for it. M22 Locust. The United States designed this light tank to be dropped from gliders. It weighed 7 tons, had paper-thin armor, and mounted a tiny 37mm gun. The problem was gliders couldn't reliably carry it. When they did, the Locust was so fragile it couldn't survive rough landings. It saw limited action during Operation Varsity in 1945. British crews hated it. The armor couldn't stop anything. The gun couldn't hurt German tanks. Maintenance was difficult because parts were scarce. It was airborne capable. That didn't make it combat capable. And finally, Maus. Germany's super heavy tank was the heaviest, fully enclosed armored vehicle ever built. It weighed 188 tons. It mounted a 128 mm main gun and a 712 mm coaxial gun. It was nearly invulnerable from the front. It was also completely impractical. The weight destroyed roads and bridges. No bridge in Europe could support it, so it had to ford rivers using a snorkel system. Fuel consumption was catastrophic. It could barely move 8 miles per hour. Only 2 prototypes were built. Both were destroyed by their own crews to prevent capture. The Soviets recovered the wreckage and built a single working example from the parts, which now sits in a museum. Dangerous in concept, a logistical catastrophe in reality. Now let's look at Cold War disasters. M60A2 Starship. The United States tried to turn the M60 into a missile launcher. The M60A2 mounted a 152 mm gun launcher that could fire both conventional shells and shell-guided missiles. The system was a nightmare. The missiles were temperamental and expensive. Loading them was slow and dangerous. The gun itself had terrible accuracy with conventional rounds. The elaborate fire control system broke down constantly. Crews despised it. Most were pulled from service and converted back to standard M60s. It looked futuristic. It fought like a technical disaster. MBT-70, a joint U.S.-German project to build the ultimate main battle tank. It had a 152 mm gun launcher, hydropneumatic suspension, and a driver station in the turret. It was packed with cutting-edge technology. It was also impossibly expensive and overcomplicated. The turret-mounted driver suffered from motion sickness. The suspension was unreliable. The gun system had the same problems as the M60A2. Costs spiraled out of control. Both nations canceled the project. Germany went on to build the Leopard 2. The U.S. built the M1 Abrams. Both learned from the MBT-70's failures. It was innovative. It was also a cautionary tale. T-64, the Soviet Union's first main battle tank with composite armor and an autoloader. It was revolutionary on paper. In practice, it was a maintenance disaster. The engine was a 2-stroke opposed piston design that was temperamental and underpowered. The suspension was complex and fragile. The autoloader occasionally malfunctioned and injured crew members. It was expensive to build and difficult to maintain. The Soviets eventually sidelined it in favor of the T-72, which was simpler and cheaper. The T-64 served primarily with units in the Western USSR because it couldn't be trusted in harsher climates. Legitimately capable when it worked, it just didn't work often enough. Moving on to modern failures. Stingray, a private venture light tank designed for export. It mounted a 105 mm gun on a light chassis, offering firepower without weight. The problem was the recoil. Firing the gun rocked the entire vehicle. Accuracy on the move was terrible. The armor was minimal, making it vulnerable to anything bigger than small arms. It found some export success with Thailand, but most potential buyers went with heavier, more stable platforms. It was fast and cheap. That didn't make it effective. Expeditionary tank. The United States Marine Corps wanted a light tank with the firepower of a main battle tank. The XM-8 prototype mounted a 120 mm gun on a chassis light enough to be air transportable. The recoil was so violent it damaged the suspension. The gun had accuracy issues because the platform was too light to stabilize it. Armor protection was laughable. It was canceled in favor of upgrading existing vehicles. The concept was sound. The execution was fundamentally flawed. Type 10. Japan's newest main battle tank is technically advanced, but ridiculously expensive. It features modular armor, an autoloader, and advanced fire control. It's also optimized for Japan's terrain, which makes it less useful anywhere else. The cost per unit is astronomical. It's lighter than most modern tanks, which limits armor protection. Japan built it because domestic production was required by law, not because it was the best option. It works well in Japan. That's a very specific use case. And finally, the lesson. Bad tank designs share common traits. Overcomplicated systems that break under stress. mismatched weight and firepower. Designs that ignore logistics, maintenance, and crew needs. Tanks that look impressive but can't survive contact with the enemy. The worst tanks in history failed because they prioritized the wrong things. Innovation without practicality. Firepower without reliability. Armor without mobility. A tank is only as good as its ability to fight, move, and survive. Which one do you think was the worst? Let me know in the comments. Subscribe for the next video.